Welcome to Make Your Mark Live as part of the Win Again Academy. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super duper excited and thrilled to have a couple of amazing guests. I asked Nicole Middendorf to join me mostly because she's just so damn smart and just knows her stuff about not just finances and the money stuff, but just overall. I mean, she's been working with athletes for a long time. She's very comfortable around them and understands how what's their DNA and so forth. And then I've got an athlete with me, and Ryan Hoag has excelled in a bunch of different sports. He's done a lot of crazy stuff throughout his life. So he's lived a few lifetimes already, and we're going to talk about that briefly. But also, he happens to be one of Nicole's clients, and so I wanted to bring on both sides of the coin and hear from both perspectives, so that you out there, especially as a retired athlete, can understand where your perspective feels and where you find yourself. So hi Ryan, hi Nicole. I don't know where you are on your TV screens, but hi down there, hi up there, hi over there.
Hello.
Hey Mark, thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So very first question, I'm going to start with Nicole, Ryan, so hang in there. But Nicole, you grew up in Minnesota, I believe, for the most part. Born and bred, or mostly born, or whatever it is.
Yep,
and,
never planned on staying.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to dash away to Colorado because I was a figure skater. And then I wanted to dash away to Europe, but I got stuck here. So I'm here.
But in all sincerity, I've visited a few times. It's not exactly the worst place on the planet to be. So, it's been a rough couple of months, but before that, it was pretty damn nice. But I also know that, you went to college, graduated college, and then, pretty soon after, you became a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley, and you were in the big company, the big institution, and then you made the switch to start your own practice and you were pretty young at the time to do that. That was pretty brave. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, now I'm old.
Shit. I didn't mean to say that, but.
No, that's okay. I left in 2003, so yes, I'm old. Yeah, no, I took that leap of faith and started my own company, which anytime you take a risk or anytime you stay focused on something or set that intention or push that boundary, I have that mentality of just go, go, go. Anytime I've ever pushed myself, I always wondered why I didn't do it sooner. So yes, I'm very happy to own my own company.
Well, and it's funny, most entrepreneurs will always say that, why didn't I do it sooner? But in your case, you did it pretty soon. So it's not like, you're not like the 52-year-old who said, oh man, I should start my own company now. So now, Ryan, in your case, I know you also grew up in Minnesota, and you went to high school there. You excelled in, I think it was 27 different sports. You were a badass. You were a ping pong player, badminton, croquet, and what else? No, I'm kidding. But football, hoops, you played tennis, but that was your big sport. Talk to me about how you ended up in football when you were, tennis, you go to college, what happened? And you played soccer too.
Right. Yeah, so I played 5 sports growing up. I lettered in 4 sports in high school and went to Wake Forest with the intention of doing the academic route. I had an academic scholarship, and I was going to go international business and Spanish. And because sports always ran through my veins, I decided I'd walk onto the tennis team there. Anybody that knows Wake Forest knows it's ACC. They've won national championship, I think 2 of the last 3 years. Obviously, this is before then, but they were still ACC, and I got crushed in my tryout. The coach liked me enough to ask me to try out the following year and play club tennis, which I did. But then in the spring, I walked onto the soccer team, and I had the tryout of my life. And to this day, I've never played better soccer, because soccer, in addition to tennis, was one of my stronger sports. And I made the team and got asked back to start the next day. And the first day of practice, I overslept, and I got cut. And so my Division I sports opportunity went out the window. I played flag football, and they take their intramurals very seriously down in the ACC. And I had a lot of success with it because I'd always been fast. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to transfer back home to Minnesota and start playing football. And 4 years later, I got drafted.
Now, I was telling someone else a story about, the draft and being drafted last and so forth, and the name that they say, they call it Mr. Irrelevant. And she was absolutely like just like crushed. She says, that is such a horrible name. And it's for that. But I said, look, think about your options. You could have been third last or 10th last or something, and no one would ever know you. Or you could have been the person not drafted and no one. So, I mean, if anything, it's a very bizarre honor that the NFL bestows on people. But sure enough, you were drafted last by the Raiders. Did they ever, I mean, tell me what that was, just real quickly, tell me what that was like to get that phone call were you even keeping track of the draft or not really? Or what was that like?
Yeah, so coming from a Division III school like Gustavus, it's not very often that guys get on the NFL radar. And so my school put together about a 200-person draft party, and they sat for 7 hours hanging on every single pick, hoping it was me. My phone would ring. A team would, call and say, hey, we got a pick coming up. You're going to be drafted, and then they wouldn't draft. And I felt just not only self-deflated, but I felt so bad for everybody that were there supporting me for 7 hours and to only find out I wasn't going to be drafted. So by the time the Raiders called the last pick, it was, from the outhouse to the penthouse really quickly, and it was a feeling of elation. And I'll never forget that feeling. I mean, I was hugging everybody. I didn't know half the people I was hugging. I hung up on Bill Callahan, the head coach, because I was so excited. Like, it was a surreal moment.
What's funny is I've interviewed lots of NFLers who've had similar moments where they get the call, and a lot of times they don't believe it's the person on the phone, or mom's yelling out, hey, who's this guy, Bill Belichick or whatever, he's on the phone or something, or whatever it might be. So that's hilarious that you hung up on him. And so a lot of what we talk about is that it takes a tremendous amount to get to that point. And I think people then say, oh, all right, I'm in, I made it. But that's not the case. I mean, that's the first step of many. I mean, when you're, what number is that? The last, is it 256 or something, or what is it?
262. Yeah,
262.
262, depending on the extra picks, the compensatory picks.
Got it. So I think what most people think is, okay, well, that's 262 new people coming into the league, but the NFL itself is jam-packed with, I mean, look, there's injuries, there's people that retire. I mean, the average, 2-point-something years is the average career overall anyway. And, each roster has the 53 plus the 40. So there's typically over 90 guys that are on a roster, I guess you could say. So there's always the need or the potential to make it, but it's tough. And I know you went through a lot of that. I don't want to dwell too much on this stuff here, but Ryan, part of what you went through is part of what, Nicole has seen probably quite a bit with some of the other athletes that she's met with. I think the general perception out there to the average, let's say, non-athlete or sports fan is that every athlete is a millionaire. Every athlete, when they retire, they play golf, they sign autographs, they just hang out at the country club, playing tennis. No. But, first of all, Ryan, tell me a little bit about that sort of 5 or 6 year stretch there where you're really trying to crack the lineups of these teams. I mean, how did you get used to that process of either, as you said, worrying about being cut or, released, et cetera?
Yeah, when you come to understand that you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be drafted in the NFL, you realize that it's a pretty unique thing. And then you hear stats like you mentioned, the average lifespan's 2.5-ish years once you've gotten to the NFL. And if you're a 7th round draft pick, I think it's 11% odds of making the roster. So you might sign a 4-year, $8 million contract and never see a single penny of that. And people don't understand, with the exception of maybe a signing bonus, depending on if you're drafted or not. But, people just see that inflated 7-figure number and they just assume, okay, well, this guy's a millionaire. Well, you might collect $18,000 of that because you were active for 1 game, but otherwise you got cut and you never see a cent more. And, it's also paid to you in a 17-week allotment, and then there's 35 other weeks that you don't get paid. So people spend money like it's coming in those 17 weeks, and then those other 35, well, by week 20, it's like, wait, my bank account looks like it did when I was in college again. Why is that? Well, it's because you paid cash for a Escalade, and you paid cash for a house and a boat, and your friends to go on a trip to Cabo or wherever, and now you don't have any money and no guarantee that you're going to make the team next year, and no guaranteed money with a signing bonus, after you've signed that initial contract. So, those are things that just are not. It's maybe readily known, but it's not thought about because, again, tunnel vision for football players, and you're dealing with a lot of most individuals that have never had money before, let alone that much money. And so can you really convince a kid that has money for the first time not to spend it and to think the long term? No, they're thinking about the next paycheck, the next fund, because this is the opportunity that they've been building up for 18, 19, 22, whatever years. And now they actually have an opportunity to give back to their friends and to show people a fun time. And that's a really tough narrative to sell to, this kid that's comes from nothing. And then you're just like, well, actually, you're not going to spend it. Let's put you on a budget. And, those kind of things aren't taught, sadly, in high school or college, really, when it comes to like fiscal management and economics and budgeting and taxes and things like that.
So how soon did you realize that you should have somebody to sort of help oversee that? I mean, is that something somebody said to you, hey, you're about to make the NFL, you're about to play, you need to have somebody keep an eye on those paychecks when they come in, or how'd that happen?
So great question. Two things happened for me. Number one, my rookie year, I had a good friend and teammate, and to this day, it's one of the more reputable people I know, asked me to get involved in an investment. And there were big name people involved, like Joe Theismann and this and that were investing significant amount of money in a stock. And so I did, and it ended up being a complete hoax. People lost anywhere from 5 to 7 figures of money, and it's still going through the process of the person's in prison and getting people money back. But I lost tens of thousands of dollars in that. And that really quickly kind of soured me even to the idea of investing, because I was like, it's not my buddy that screwed me. He didn't get anything. Like, he got screwed as well. But for me to like do my due diligence and try to like set aside some money to invest with somebody that I felt comfortable with, like the fact that turned sour really soured me on allowing anybody to mess with my money. And then secondly, I remember when I was with the Vikings, so this was my second, third, and fourth years in the league, and we had one of those meetings where, during training camp, or maybe it was during the season, I can't remember, but they're dreaded meetings because they break up the team meeting and your wide receiver meeting, that the financial people from the team come and speak to you. And nobody wants to be there. They're hot, they're tired, this is their nap time, whatever it might be. And I remember the stat they told us is that, the NFL gives $2 for every dollar you invest in your 401k, right? Which is unheard of. Or at least back when I played, that was the collective bargaining agreement, right? $2 for every dollar. And the NFL was at 28% for individuals that were taking advantage of that. And the Vikings were dead last, number 32 out of 32. I don't know what the percentage was there, but probably like 12 or something, right? And you hear that and you're like, wait, the NFL is trying to give you free money, and the NFL is as cheap as they come. Like, the fact that they're actually trying to give us money, how are we not taking advantage of it? I know that when I get active, my immediate first move is going to put all my paycheck into 401k. And I was fortunate enough my first year with the Vikings to get active for 3 games, and all the money I could, I maxed out my 401k. And, it was a great decision for me now because, I have a 401k retirement, and the jobs I have now really don't set me up for that because I'm more of like a 1099 independent contractor. So I'm happy to at least have something to look forward to when I, in my 50s or 60s.
That's really interesting. So Nicole, the big question I have for you then is, following up on that, how do you how do you speak to the Ryans of the world that come to you, or maybe they don't come to you, but you hear about an athlete who's either been burned or they're really suspicious or they've heard all these terrible stories. How do you talk to them about, look, you know, how do you say, trust me, don't trust anybody else, trust me? I mean, how does that work?
Right. I mean, I think it just comes from getting to know people, and it's that relationship. It goes back to a story. This was when I did a radio show, and I was at this event, and I walked off the stage, and I went to go get a glass of water, and I was pregnant at the time. No one knew that I was pregnant. And I just went to grab a glass of water at the bar, and the gentleman's like, hey, let me buy you a drink. He's like, you're Nicole Middendorf. I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, no, that's okay. Like water. He's like kind of pushed it again. And he's like, are you taking new clients? I'm like, yeah, sure. Like I can help you. And he's like, well, can you guarantee me 10%? And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm a licensed financial advisor. I'm not going to guarantee anyone 10%. Like I can't do that. And like in general, your money should be doubling every 7 to 10 years, but I can't ever guarantee you. He's like, well, I got this guy in New York and he's guaranteeing my family and me 10%. And so he goes, I took 20 million and put that in there. And so I'd give you a few million if you could guarantee me 10%. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, I can't. Okay, that individual was Bernie Madoff.
I was going to say Bernie Madoff, yeah.
And so fast forward, this was probably like 5 years ago, I think, maybe 4 years ago. The same gentleman, who's a very prominent person in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, reached out to me, and he's like, would you help me rebuild? And so when I have people like that have gone with someone and like lost tons of money or, succumb to these scams that are out there, like that's where there's so many of them. I mean, I just had another Olympic athlete yesterday. He just sent me a picture. He's like, hey, I got this letter in the mail and they're wanting this. I'm like, it's a scam. And unfortunately, there's so many things out there right now that are. And so I always give the general advice, like, so when you're looking at a financial advisor's business card, that's the simplest thing. Look at that, or look at their website. Look to see that there's disclaimers on the bottom. Like anything that I do, anything that I say, even all the radio, the TV, like all the Instagram videos, LinkedIn, all that stuff, that has to go through compliance first. And so that gives you kind of that sense of security. And so you want to make sure that your financial advisor is regulated, not just a registered investment advisor like Bernie Madoff was. But and most of it's really relationships. And there are some athletes, like I never planned on working with professional athletes. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst and helped an NFL guy probably 7 years ago through his divorce. And that's where he's like, Nicole, you got to work with athletes. I'm like, that's okay. Like, I have a great business. I don't need to work with athletes. I'm like, there's tons of financial advisors out there that are helping them. He's like, no, seriously, you got to do this. And I'm like, I just kind of brushed him off. And then I helped a former Minnesota Twins player through a divorce. And this Twins player had retired and he became a financial advisor. And he came to me and he's like, I want to be very amicable with my wife. I'm a financial advisor. Like, can you help us decide everything and, figure everything out? So I did. And I had to tell her, she was 58 years of age. I had to tell her that they had to sell their house. He had to go get a job. She ended up with the Twins baseball pension plan and there was nothing else. He had been cashing out about $300,000 to $500,000 a year from his retirement. They were living like he still was a professional athlete. And he was a financial advisor. And it was at that moment where I'm like, I don't know. I went to private Catholic school and my parents raised me with such strong morals and values. I'm like, I can't let this happen. And that's how then I became on this path of helping athletes. And really a lot of it's just relationships and knowing people and knowing them for a period of time. And I can't help everyone.
Well, those are great stories. And, it's interesting. You hear about the Bernie Madoff stories, that they're out there, but then there's the stories in between the Nicoles and the Bernie Madoffs that are almost like you were just saying, this former Twins player who became a financial advisor, and he may have a great name and people want to, wow, it'd be cool to work with. And I'm not specifically singling him out, but there may be people that have names that you say, oh, I would love to be with them. But at the end of the day, their performance is not that good, or they're just sort of bringing in the money, but they're not really doing much with it that's going to be really effective. So that leads me to the next question. speaking of money, you know, one of the most powerful things I saw a team do, and I've heard that they do, is the LA Rams. And I think I may have been telling you this recently, Nicole, but the Rams bring in their new guys, their rookies, into a conference room, and they bring in a wheelbarrow full of cash, and they dump it on the table, and they say, this is $1 million right here, $1 million of cash. And of course, these guys are all like, oh my God, this is, you know, they can't believe it. And then what they do is their director of player engagement, or whoever it might be, takes a shovel or whatever it is and goes like this and pushes 450 grand into the wheelbarrow and says, gone, taxes. Takes 30 grand, gone, agent. Takes whatever it is, gone. And I think they're left with something like 82 grand out of that million that the guy says, this is what you have to play with right here. And it's such a powerful message because it's visual, it's right in front of them, and that's what they see is left. And it drives home the point that, and Ryan, you were saying this earlier, when you're 20, 21, 22, 23, and you're given money for the first time, even if it's $1,000, you can't believe how much that seems like. But you do want to show off. You do want to say, I made it to the top. I've got this money now. So I'm hoping that by seeing something like that, where out of that 1,000, you really should only be spending $82, which you don't want to. You want to spend much more than that. But it's such a powerful message. Is there, so right now as we speak, and I don't know which of you two want to chime in on this, but do you see, whether it's the NFL or any of the professional leagues or the Olympic committees or the universities or any of these entities teaching people the basics of finance like that?
They're trying.
Yeah.
I just had another conference call with the NFLPA, and you know, they're like, what else can we do? You know, like, how can we? And you know, their whole thought is, well, let's go and, you know, go to the teams. And they were doing some pilot projects and things like that. But to me, like, I've found the best has been when an athlete has had a mentor. That's another athlete. And they don't necessarily have to have had that horrible experience themselves. But unfortunately, I find the majority of athletes out there have had that kind of experience, that someone didn't pay their mortgages, or, you know, someone lost 10 grand or $100,000. I mean, there's virtually almost every athlete I know has had some sort of experience. And so it's telling those stories and hearing from someone else. I can come in and talk all day long about SEP IRAs and Roth IRAs and budgeting and taxes, but I'm a former figure skater. Like, I don't have that same perspective versus like Ryan telling this story of, hey, you know, I was actually scammed. I invested in this thing that my buddy recommended. And so having that mentoring component, I feel, is so important, and really I feel is the key to make some change and make some difference with the numbers of athletes found bankruptcy.
Interesting.
That sounded like a job opportunity.
Hey, now you're talking.
So Ryan, but then when you were saying earlier how you guys were sort of forced to go to these meetings with some of these financial advisors and others, and you'd be bored and you'd be looking. I mean, so I almost feel like the teams were kind of checking a box to say, well, we provided a financial education for these players, and then the financial advisors were doing their shtick because they were talking as if they were talking to a room full of executives, not understanding the psyche or the mindset of a 20, 22-year-old, 24-year-old. Is that sort of what you experienced?
Well, so a couple responses to that. Number one, we're inundated with so many meetings, right? I mean, during training camp, it's a minimum 16-hour day, and you can only be on the field, 4 of those hours, and lifting for 2 of those hours. So the rest is meeting time. So you don't even know what meeting's coming next, right? So it might be the referees coming to talk about the new rule changes, to the owner coming to talk about the importance of being respectful when you're wearing the emblem, to whomever coming to talk. So it was one of those. And then to your point, you know, I wouldn't say that they're speaking like they are to a group of executives, but they really, how I felt is that a lot of times they spoke to us like they knew we didn't care, and therefore they were just beside themselves and just like, well, essentially, we're going to go through this, check a box. We know you don't care. We're not going to try to convince you otherwise. don't be dumb. If you're going to be dumb, I don't have the time for you. As opposed to like really being like, no, look, listen to me, listen to what I'm saying. Like, this is your money. And that whole, the Rams thing, I think that's brilliant. I think that has wow factor. The rookie symposium, if you're fortunate enough to be one of the people that are drafted, right, they do some stuff like that. But again, a lot of it's just checking a box. I liken it to how the NFL, with even now, but 10 years ago, what their response to concussions were, right? They would check a box and be like, well, you know, you guys, if you don't feel good, you know, make sure you go check. But reality, like a guy like me, well, any NFL player, they're going to die on the field if they have to. And second of all, if it's a guy that's potentially going to get cut, like the coach will single you out, can't make a club in the tub. So if you're seeing stars, you got to get back up there and play the next play. And if you don't, you're going to get cut. And that's just the reality. So, yeah, the NFL has done a piss poor job and continues to in a number of avenues. And it's a you know, a billion and billions of dollar industry. And that's what they care about, that financial check mark for them.
And you know what's interesting, though, and this is something that I've been trying to impress upon those who might listen, is that when you give a player, an athlete, comfort in certain areas of their life, whether it's financial or if it's mental or if it's, you know, other types of physical, whatever it is, and they feel they don't need to worry about that, their performance increases on the field. And it's really interesting how, and it's not just the NFL, it's all the leagues. And again, a lot of the governing entities, they seem to feel a lot of times like, well, the athletes, you know, they can handle it themselves. They should just be focusing on what's on the field. And I try to say, listen, that's the wrong attitude to have. You want your athlete to be clear-minded but to be content with everything so they can completely excel in the field. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I mean, from an educational standpoint, I have a teaching degree, right? And I know that the best way we learn is, right, you have a mutual respect. There has to be that investment in wanting to learn and wanting to, you know, and that was something when I looked at Nicole, right, I had my guard up at the start. I didn't know what her intentions were. And it wasn't until she allowed me to welcome me to her family and give her daughter tennis lessons that I was like, okay, well, this is somebody that obviously feels comfortable with me. I can reciprocate that and feel comfortable with her. So to your point, Mark, yeah, there needs to be that reciprocation. Well,
at the end of the day, how good was the lesson?
Well, you know, she's
a spunky spitfire.
She asked for a second one. You know,
there you go.
That's the ultimate litmus test.
There you go. Excellent answer. Before we go any further, just if any of the attendees want to ask a question, there's actually a Q&A button at the bottom there. Just click that and type in your question, whatever it might be. If it's related to the financial space or if it's specific to either of their experiences as they've gone through their careers, I would love to hear those. So, you know, Ryan, you've had a fairly, we'll say, non-traditional career, I guess you could say, in the sense that, I mean, you tried football for a while. At what point, just real quickly, was there a moment that you kind of woke up and said, you know what, this ain't happening? Or was it an injury? What was it that said, all right, time's up, I'm going to do something else?
Oh, yeah, there was a moment. So, you know, I never grew up expecting to be a professional football player because I didn't play football, right? I played every other sport. And so once that became a reality, I remember my agent, Ricky Left at the time, it was Synergy Sports Management. He was telling people, like, this is the kind of kid with, you know, a blue-collar work ethic coming from D3. He's the kind of kid that ends up lasting 10 years in professional football. So my goal was always to, because he took a chance on me, I was like, I'm going to do everything I can to last 10 years in professional football. I lasted 9, 6 of those in the NFL here and there, and then a number of other leagues. But, you know, like anybody, we all have our stories of being cut. I think I was cut 15 times or something ridiculous like that. But, you know, towards the end of my career, late 20s, I was playing unbelievable football. Like, if I could have played that back in 03, 04, Raiders, Giants, Vikings, I would have, you know, been a mainstay on those teams. And and I was in the UFL, United Football League, which is no longer. But and I went from being a starter one day, and then the cuts came and they cut me, and the coach sat me down. And he's like, Ryan, we spent 3 hours going back and forth about you, and it had been a story that I had been told. I was the last person cut, and I was always a fringe guy. Like, you know, I was never the sexy pick, but I was safe and I knew all the positions and I could, you know, but it's not always what all the coaches want, right? I'm a glue guy. I'm like the ultimate glue guy.
Mm.
And I looked at the coach and I said, Coach, I've been told that my whole career. I think I'm done. And I walked away and started to get into education. So
talk to me a little bit about the education thing, because obviously this is something that you do and it's something that Nicole does too. I mean, you know, a lot of what you both have to do is teach. And what compelled you to get into the teaching side of things? And what do you feel, the follow-up question is, what are some of the most important lessons you feel you've taught other athletes?
Sure. So I actually transferred from Wake Forest to Gustavus to fulfill my desire to have an impact on others, right? I knew that international business in Spanish was more of a financially driven market and prestigious kind of thing. And I was like, you know what, that's not what my calling is. From a young age, I always wanted to have as big an impact as possible in a positive way. So I transferred to become a Lutheran pastor, and ended up changing that my first year to education because I love kids and I thought I could always stay within the church somehow, be it summer camp or whatever. And my girlfriend at the time, her roommate was a kindergarten teacher, and she's like, Ryan, you love kids, you need to try this J-term experience. I did, and I was sold on being a kindergarten teacher. So that's where the educational piece came in. And as far as what I've, you know, my biggest takeaways, or hopefully other kids' takeaways, I think it's multidimensional. So for me, coming from, you know, the lack of sports specialization, I try to instill, and I know it's a different world now, but I try to let kids know that that is a thing that's possible. It is a thing that, you know, a kid from South Minneapolis that was a 0-star recruit because he never got recruited, right? If you work hard enough and you put in the time, obviously some athleticism helps, but if you want it bad enough, you can make it. And so the idea of perseverance is certainly something I love to instill. And then lastly, my mom's best advice she's ever given to me: never stop asking questions. Like, I was the guy that was annoying in the wide receiver room. Probably considered a brown nose. I was considered the tempo violator. That was my nickname for the Vikings, and all my former teammates will attest to that. If you ask any of them, from Randy Moss to Michael Bennett to Dante Culpepper to Antoine Winfield, they'd always call me the tempo violator because every single play I went 100%, and it pissed the defense off every single day, especially Fridays when it's supposed to be more of a jog through. But I would also have the veterans come to me and be like, hey, that's your ticket, man. You got to keep doing what you do because that keeps you in the league.
That's great. I love that. That's really good. The temple violator. All right. I like that. I'm going to have to remember that one. Nicole, give me a couple of, whether it's important lessons or advice that you feel that you've shared or continue to share with athletes that you think really stands out.
I think being an only child, and then one of my figure skating coaches had a master's in psychology, and one of my good friends is Dr. Jen Welcher, the first female coach of the NFL, is a PhD as well. And I mean, there's so many days where I feel like I'm a therapist, really more than a wealth advisor, and it's all those pieces of thinking of, you know, what do you want? And really, it's always, you know, people get so like tied up sometimes in the money and the stuff, and it's really not, that's not what brings you happiness. And so it's always, for me, like bringing it back, like, what's important to you? You know, what do you really want? Do you want to start a business? Do you want to be a teacher? Do you want to coach tennis? You know, what are the things that really, really drive you? And let's set up a financial plan, or how can I help you get you there? And so much of it is how you think in your mind and like who you are as an individual. And I'm just trying to be one of those cheerleaders on the sidelines that can be that coach, that can be that person that inspires, that can be that teacher, that leader, that person, that educator, that person to help get people really where they want to go.
Well, and it's great that you mentioned that, because, I find that, and I speak with a lot of athletes who, when they leave their sport, or even before they leave their sport, they have no idea what they want to do next. And they tend to be, I say they tend to be reactive to what the market feeds them instead of proactive. And, one of the things I like to try to do is really give the advice that they should be focusing on developing secondary interests while they're playing, not a plan B for life after sport, but maybe just something else that they like doing, that they enjoy doing, that they can develop into something when they leave their sport. And then from there, it's all about, going after, one thing you said earlier, I think it was Ryan, that the importance of asking questions, of developing a network and meeting people and just wanting to learn more, because that can always lead to being proactive in your approach of what's next instead of reactive. And so, I think that you probably both have seen athletes who just kind of come out of their sport and they say, well, I guess I'll just be just be a coach doing this or do whatever it is, instead of pursuing something they love doing. Now, Ryan, I'm guessing, the teaching tennis thing, I mean, clearly that's a passion of yours. You love doing that. I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's what but it's not something that you're necessarily settling for. I mean, it's something that you found it found you, and now you've been doing it for, you mentioned earlier, 6 years. But tell me, so I'm shifting gears for a second here, because what I also want to say is that most of us, when we leave school or we leave a career that we make a drastic shift, a lot of times we don't really know what we don't know. I had no idea when I graduated my college that I didn't know that about 95% of the companies that existed out there, 99% of them. I had no idea that there was a company that made the whatever it is on these phones. Of course, they didn't have phones back then. But anyway, or laptops or whatever it is. So the question really is, how do you, especially with you, Ryan, you talked about the earlier when we were offline a little bit, working with this drone company. But it's not like you left football thinking, I'm going to go work for a drone company. So how did that, tell me a little bit about how opportunities present themselves, or do you have to go after them?
So my passion has always been impacting others and teaching. It was never football, right? It became football because I'm a competitive person. And when that became a reality, I wanted to achieve the best I could and wouldn't accept no for an answer, essentially. So let me, that's probably different than a lot of people that, and honestly, can be a negative mark for people, right? One of my best friends, Jamil Soriano, went to Harvard, came out the same draft class as me, didn't get drafted because both his parents are surgeons. And that was one of the negatives on his scouting combine review. Both parents, how bad does he really want it? Right? He ended up on practice squad with New England, got a Super Bowl ring and this and that. But right, they whereas a lot of people are like, well, why don't they, they need a good person that, has a good heart like you, Ryan, or like my friend Jamil. And at the end of the day, the NFL cares about guys that are desperate and doing anything. And a lot of times that do anything ends up being a knucklehead, right? So I think that's a little different story that I'm going to have than a lot of other people. But for me, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher, right? I was born to lead. I was born to teach. And when I was done with football, when I told the Omaha Nighthawks of the UFL that I was done, I was like, okay, now it's time for that chapter. Being a kindergarten or first grade teacher, which was always my path had I not gotten drafted, was a tough sell coming out of the NFL and being a professional football player for 8-9 years because of how transient my lifestyle was. I lived in 3 other countries. I lived in 9 other states. I was all over the place, and I was like, can I really do the same thing with my first grade class every Monday, every Tuesday, calendar time at 9 a.m. and then this and that? I was like, that's a tough sell for me. So that's how I got into the nonprofit work with Upstream Arts. I'm a teaching artist for them now. that I'm super passionate about. I've been with them for 12 years. But so, you know, these things have popped up, to your point, and rightly or wrongly, I've been put on a pedestal, and my narrative now and the words I have to say especially resonate in the Minneapolis community, because they see, oh, there's a kid of color that made it, and here's how he did it. He wasn't Division I silver spooner. He went the hard way, and academics were first, and ended up, you know, the professional route. And now he's doing something he loves and giving back, teaching and coaching.
That's up. What about you, Nicole? What do you think?
Great story. One of the other pieces that I wanted to add, as you were talking earlier, there were so many defining moments that I had, so when I was a figure skating coach, one of the things that I did with the kids is, so let's say I would tell someone, you know, go do a double axel or whatever. And they would say, I can't. I'd say, pull out the dictionary. Where's that word? You owe me $1. I would collect $1 from them. I'd turn around and give it to their parents. My students, you know, didn't know. But what happened is they stopped saying the word I can't. They would stop coming over to the boards to me to say I can't do it. They would just go do it. And so I believe so much in life is like taking that mental block off and thinking like, okay, the world is your oyster. Like, and most athletes are looking at football like that is their life. They're not necessarily, you know, Ryan has a unique story. And so I feel like so many of them, like, football is their life, and then football's over. And there's this like loss of, okay, who am I? What do I do? Where do I go? And so the more that, and I really feel like as a parent of a kid, of 2 kids, one that plays football, is really instilling in kids, like, it's not about the game. Like, you know, what is your big picture? Like, what is really important to you? Yes, you can love football, but what is that deep inside that's really, really important, that really drives you? Because that can drive your career. I love to work with athletes that are more successful off the court or off the ice or off the field than on the field. And that all comes from your heart and who you are as a person and your passion and what drives you.
And Nicole, and one of the big things is now, whether or not you have a degree or not, you're done with football, and most likely having to start at an entry-level position, right? And in a year, 52 weeks, you're making what you made in one game. Like that, like what the hell? I don't want to, that sounds like a lot of work. Why would I don't want to do that. And then you'll see the depression. You'll see the money just fly out, because, you know, nobody wants to work that hard for the amount of one paycheck in the NFL. Like, it's a tough sell, to your point, Nicole.
Yep.
Well, you know, it's interesting, and that's a great point, Ryan, also, because, you know, when an athlete retires, they've gone to the end of their career, but to reach the apex of their career, it took them many, many years to get to that point, to become that elite athlete. And sometimes they forget that they started way down here when they were 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. They weren't making $100,000 a game or whatever it was. And I think sometimes they need to realize and remember that they're not necessarily starting completely entry level. They might be, but, you know, it's another travel. You know, they need to go back up that route to get to be an elite, whatever it is, again. And I think, look, to me, the biggest thing is number one, the loss of identity and not really sure what you are and who you are after you leave your sport. But then secondly, the biggest thing that needs to be done for an athlete is to fill up the time. And what I mean by that is putting that daily structure back in, having a reason to wake up at 7 a.m., go work out, eat properly, go do this, have conversations, meet people, but have a daily routine. Because when you retire, a lot of times you're retiring to a couch or to a bed or to something, and you watch TV or playing video games, whatever it is, and suddenly things fall off the edge. So, these are all really great lessons, because, Nicole, I like the fact that you came from obviously an athletic background. Triple Lutz or just double Lutz? What do you think? Can you do the triple?
I went all the way. I made it through the gold levels. My parents, this is bless their heart. Like, my parents did not want me to go to the Olympics because they wanted me to have a normal life. And I truly appreciate that for them. I went all the way through the gold, and then was coached all the way through college. I had to give up figure skating and coaching when I started working at Morgan Stanley. And that was actually a really hard decision for me to do, just because I love kids. I love inspiring people. I love helping people.
That's awesome. And Ryan, obviously so by the way, Ryan, remember I was mentioning earlier offline about the extreme tennis sport? Okay. The gentleman who's invented it is actually on the webinar right now, and he just sent a question asking if you'd want to play professionally for his league. So I'll make sure to connect you guys. You know, you just have to bring a few boulders and tires, and I think there's bazookas and surface air missiles. I'm not sure what else is involved with the game, but Pete, don't kill me for saying that. Anyway, but no, you guys, I'll definitely introduce you offline. I think it's great. That's a super question. So anyway, now, one of the things that I think most people do when they look at financial advisors, they think, all right, well, this person, he or she is going to show me, okay, I'm going to put X amount in Apple stock, in Netflix, and this and that, whatever, stocks and bonds and this and that. But I guess one thing I'm curious about, Nicole, is do you ever, as part of what you do as an advisor, would you ever recommend other things that seem to be doing and have been doing fairly well, sort of fairly historically? I'm a big collector in the sports space, but there's people that collect artwork. There's people that have invested in sports franchises that have done very well. What do you ever say, look, you know, even though you're not necessarily earning a commission off or a portion of, do you ever suggest certain things for a certain percentage of someone's portfolio?
I always come back to when I was at Morgan Stanley. I had met with a business owner, and my branch manager, you know, I was a new advisor. My branch manager's like, he couldn't understand like why I couldn't get more money from this individual. And I said, well, he's a business owner. And he told me I was stupid. Because he's like, look, here are my financials in my business. He goes, every single year for the last 10 years, I've made over 42% of my business. So why should I invest in the stock market? And I was a young advisor. I really didn't have like a great answer for that. And so my branch manager was like, that's dumb. And I'm like, and so it was really interesting because I'm a business owner. I have multiple businesses. I own a commercial building, and I totally get it because I'm a business owner. And it's all, you know, every financial advisor out there is like, you know, don't have all your eggs in one basket, but do they really actually like practice that? And so I'm a huge advocate. Like this year was the first year that I had a handful of rookies. Some of them I really couldn't help, but like one guy in particular, it's a Saturday night, and he texted me, he's like, can you talk? I'm like, sure. Both my kids were asleep. There's this young 20-year-old kid, and he's asking me about setting up a foundation and like, how do you do that? I'm like, you haven't even been drafted yet. Wow. And here you are, you know, thinking about a foundation. And so that's like, I'm all for that. I have my own foundation. And so it's not, you know, the stock market isn't everything. You know, stocks go up, bonds go down. It used to be that's what you had. And so there's so many different types of alternative investments. I'm a huge advocate of having residual income. And residual income is not just going to come from stocks and bonds. That can come from real estate, multiple businesses. There's so many different types of things. Where I do encourage people to be careful, though, is there's so many opportunities out there where the guy is like, hey, you know, I'm starting this business, you know, invest with me. Hey, I'm starting this business, invest with me. You know, there's so many different opportunities out there because there's so much private equity stuff that's happening, and so many athletes that have these great ideas, from backpacks to umbrellas to just all different types of businesses that they want to do. And so just be really careful that you understand what you're getting into. But yes, as a financial planner, I know it's not just, I'm not just looking at what does someone have with me, it's their whole big picture and who they are as a person and as an individual.
Well, unless it's investing, of course, in the Win Again Academy. Just saying. Now, so Ryan, I guess what I'd love to hear from you then is just, you know, for the athletes out there that are listening, the retired athletes, you know, give me a sense of, you know, maybe give me a couple bits of advice that you would give them as they consider their next steps.
Right. So I think for me, the key has been to start small with somebody you feel very, very comfortable with. Because if something happens or another COVID hits, you know, those losses can be mitigated and the blame doesn't go to this person that, you know, set you up in that situation, right? So I think that's key. I think diversifying, you know, and not putting all your eggs in one basket like I did back then. I didn't have a ton of money and I just cut a check and I was like, here you go, and make me a lot of money. And it lost me all my money. And so, you know, I would say start small, find somebody that you truly trust, and, you know, take the time to look into their background, find out why it's important for them to be working with you, and see if it's just a money grab or if it's somebody that's truly invested, like the Nicoles of the world, Prosperwell Financial, that legitimately want to, you know, see you succeed in whatever that means, even if it's, you know, not going to make them a bunch of money. Like, she legitimately wants me to do well. And that for me, you know, is everything.
That's great. And yourself, Nicole?
What's the question? Sorry, we're so like in tune listening to Ryan.
What's your favorite dog's name? No, no. What kind of advice would you give? You know, one or two pieces of advice you might give an athlete who's starting to go through that transition.
It's have a plan and really like first take an assessment of where you are. Like, okay, where am I emotionally? Where am I financially? Where am I? And then where do I want to be? And then what can I do to get there? And because sometimes in life things can get so overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming, because that's what everything I do. It's, you know, it's not just financial planning. It's making sure that you have a will or a trust and the taxes are done. And when you start thinking about all those things, it can be overwhelming. And so it's just first take an assessment. Where are you and where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And then gradually do those baby steps to get yourself there.
All right, so I'm going to ask a question now that you're not, I don't think you're allowed to answer it, but I'm not sure if you are or not, so I'm going to try it anyway. So if I have $1,000 right now,
what should I do with it? Can't tell you.
Invest in the Win Again Academy. No, no. Yeah,
I can't tell you, but what I can say is, you know, for those that are live, that before it's July 15th is the tax deadline, and so it's huge for people that have 1099 income, or, you know, are just doing things on the side. Like, you can take up to 25% of that and put that away, and it's a deduction for you on your taxes, which is huge. So Roth IRAs, SEP IRAs, inside of there, you can invest in anything, and I can't tell you specifically what to buy. You got to call me first.
Got it. All right. And Ryan, aside from spending the $1,000 on tennis lessons with you, what else would you recommend?
Well, healthy chocolate is what I invest in. I wouldn't recommend that. Which, in retrospect, I look back and I'm like, that wasn't the brightest, but that's also a 22-year-old decision, right? So that happens. Again, you know, I would say safe bets, you know, personally for me, like big companies like you mentioned earlier, as opposed to niche, you know, one-offs like a healthy chocolate thing that, yeah, it could be the next TikTok, but it could also be what happened to me, right? But if you go into a big one like a Google or Netflix or whatever, Amazon, then you're probably going to end up pretty safe and get a good ROI.
Well stated. So listen, I want to tie all this together and wrap this up by saying, number one, by the way, obviously, thank you for being on board. Before we jump off, though, I want to ask you both the best way to reach you. So Nicole, what's the best way for people to find you, whether it's you know, on social media, LinkedIn, email, etc.? What's the best way?
Anywhere, prosperwell.com. So prosperwell.com, you can go there and email me, call me. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We're everywhere.
And where'd you come up with the name Prosperwell? Was Prosper good taken already, or?
I loved prosperity. I love that. That's great.
Word. I know, it's a perfect word. Well done. Ryan, how about yourself?
Prosperverywell.com is mine because it's Nicole's plus pump. No, you know, I'm on all the social media channels. That would probably be the easiest way to find me. Twitter at Ryan Scott Hoag, Instagram at Ryan Scott, Ryan Scott 612. But yeah, I'm happy to give advice or work with anyone that needs it. Find me and I'll help.
I really appreciate that. Well, listen, both of you, thanks so much for your time. I hope that, the audience took away a lot of things. Obviously, lots of great advice for athletes as they transition. Also, the advice about finances is really important. I didn't want to make this about obviously what to do with your $1,000 and that sort of thing, but more so just how to be in the right mental frame of mind to understand what happens not just with your money, but how it really impacts so much else. And by feeling sort of safe with that and having somebody like a Nicole sort of handle it, where you can feel very sort of secure and comfortable, and knowing that it's being taken well care of is so important. And Nicole, as you mentioned earlier, it's just so important to be with somebody that you trust, that you're comfortable with, that you can be friendly with, but also who has, as you said, a business card and a website and happens to be someone who's fairly well established is critical. So thanks again for being on board, both of you. And, we'll continue to be doing these as time goes on. Lots of webinars coming up. There's also going to be some exciting events in the Win Again Club Room. Make sure you keep your eyes peeled for that on the schedule. And I'm also sticking right now, if I do this right, I probably won't do it right, but if you want to learn more about the Academy, I just stuck the link in the chat box, so make sure you check that out when you have a chance. But otherwise, thanks again for being on board, both of you, Ryan and Nicole.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.